afternoon, everybody. You're very welcome. Thanks for joining us. My name is Eamonn Mac Aodha. I'm the Director for Relations with Parliament and the Institutions at the Irish Permanent Representation to the EU. And I'm delighted to be able to welcome you to this, the sixth in a series of webinars focusing on EU job opportunities. Today we're going to look at opportunities in the field of interpretation and translation in the EU institutions. In previous webinars, we focused on EU traineeships, on Irish women in the EU institutions, on Irish language opportunities for lawyer linguists and proofreaders, on opportunities in the field of agriculture, and most recently on opportunities in the field of health and food safety. And all these webinars can be watched back at any time on our YouTube accounts. Ireland's future prosperity is very closely linked, of course, with our EU membership, and a strong understanding and connection with the EU's institutions and agencies is essential to ensuring that Ireland can effectively engage with the European Union. And with this in mind, the Irish government recently launched a strategy aimed at increasing Ireland's staffing representation in the EU institutions and agencies. Along with several ambitious measures in the strategy, these webinars form an important part of our efforts to boost that representation in the EU institutions. And the Department of Foreign Affairs provides support to Irish citizens applying for jobs in the EU at every step of the way, including online practice packs and one-to-one training depending on the competition stage. So please do contact us if you are applying for EU posts. You can contact us at eujobs@dfa.ie. The Department of Foreign Affairs EU Jobs website also has practical advice for people interested in a career with the EU. And I would encourage everyone to visit that site. Now, I'm delighted to welcome our four guest speakers today. Morag NEATH joins us from the European Commission's Directorate General for Interpretation. Morag will briefly outline paths into interpretation careers as well as some current opportunities. Also from DG Interpretation, we will be joined by Kevin McCarthy and Aisling Ní Chaitheann, who will both expand on their own career paths and current roles as interpreters. From the Commission's Directorate General for Translation, we will be joined by Audrey-Anne Flynn, who will expand on her current role and opportunities in translation. So thanks very much to all of our speakers for joining us here today and for giving up their time. You will have a chance, if you wish, to ask questions through the Slido platform by going to the webpage Slido, that's sli.do, and using the code #EUJobs to access the system. You don't have to register, anybody can do it. Additionally, if you would like to ask your question in Irish, please feel free to do that. Aisling has volunteered to demonstrate her interpretation skills in a practical way today, and tá fáilte rud in ceiste chur gaige mas muoine vision dhéanamh ar nóig. I will also ask some questions to Aisling when we talk to her in Irish as well. So chuir mé roinn ceist ar Aisling trí gaige trí bhean na Gaeilge freisin. It's a great pleasure again to welcome you all. So let's get started. I'm going to hand over to our first speaker. Morag, thanks for being with us. The floor is yours.
Yes, hello, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you very much to you, Eamonn, and to your colleagues at the Irish Permanent Representation for setting up today's webinar and inviting us to take part. Yes, so as Eamonn has already said, I'm from DG Interpretation at the European Commission, and I'm Deputy Head of the English Interpreting Unit. I don't really have much to say because I want to give the floor to both Kevin and Aisling to talk about their own personal experience and tell you a little bit about how they became interpreters and what the requirements are and the procedure is. But suffice to say that now is really an excellent time for Irish budding interpreters for two reasons, really. The first reason is that with the end of the Irish language derogation that is applied up until now since Ireland joined the EU, we are of course looking to expand our pool of interpreters with Irish in their combination. And secondly, because of Brexit, we are in the English Interpreting Unit, a unit that's made up of many different nationalities, but Unfortunately, in the future, we will not be able to recruit people with only British nationality. And of course, to work in the English interpreting unit, you have to have English as a mother tongue, which means there will be plenty of job opportunities out there for Irish people with a EU passport. So as I say, I won't go into any great detail at this stage, but I'm here to answer any specific questions you may have. And I'm going to hand straight over to Kevin to tell you a little bit more about our accreditation process and how he became an interpreter. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Morag. So yeah, I will tell you a little bit about how I became an interpreter, but I will also talk more generally about how one becomes an interpreter. Becoming an interpreter is slightly different. The process is slightly different to other EU jobs. So later Audrey will talk about translation, and she'll talk a lot about the competition. And while the competition is relevant to us, there's different ways into the interpreting profession. There are a few different paths. That doesn't mean it's easier, but there are a few different paths in. And then what I'm going to do is I'll hand over to Aisling, and Aisling will tell you a little bit more about Irish and also about the kind of nicer sides of the job, what it's like to work as an interpreter in the English unit, work as an interpreter at the Commission. So a little bit about my background. I'm originally from Limerick. I have no exotic elements to my background. I'm entirely 100% from Limerick. And I was just into languages at school. I went on to do French and Spanish at the University of Limerick. So again, nothing too exotic. And I graduated from an applied languages course in the University of Limerick. And then that was around 2004, I think. And there were no interpreting courses in Ireland at the time. Now things have changed since. And I did what anyone in that case would do. I went abroad. My choice was maybe not the most obvious one. I ended up in Romania. It's a long story. I ended up in Romania. I taught there for a while, and I ended up doing a master's degree in conference interpreting. Now that's really, you need to have a master's degree in conference interpreting. It's a very specific skill. There are various courses around Europe. There is one in Galway as well. So I ended up doing the course in Romania. It was around the time Romania was joining the EU, so I timed it fairly well as well. So I did my master's degree in conference interpreting. By that stage, I'd learned Romanian to the necessary standard, so I started with French and Romanian. So the first step into becoming an interpreter at the Commission was to pass what's known as the ACI, or freelance test. So this is a test organized by all of the institutions, and they recruit freelance interpreters. So you can work for all, either Parliament, the Commission, the Court of Justice. You're hired on a day-to-day basis, but there are people who make a perfectly good living out of it. But half of our interpreting is provided by freelance interpreters. To qualify for the freelance test, obviously, as I said, you need to have your master's in conference interpreting, but the language requirements are something you should pay attention to as well. So you need to have either French or German as one of your languages. And I'll tell you a little bit about the level you need in a second. So you need to have French or German. So then you can present with, let's say, French and Irish. You can present with French and German. You can go with German and Spanish, for example, French and Polish. So I did French and Romanian when I started, which is slightly unusual at the time, but I had the French, and then Romanian was maybe the slightly more unusual component. As I said, I'd learned some Spanish, but I kept that in the background, worked on it a bit, and subsequently, a bit down the line, I started working with Spanish, because you have to pass a test every single time when you're a freelance interpreter. So when I talk about the level of language, I think it's really interesting to just know what level of language you're talking about, because it's very specific for us. As an interpreter, you're in an interpreting booth, you have somebody talking, you don't have time to go and get the dictionary, you don't have time to look up a word necessarily. Now, there are going to be words we don't know, but you need to have a very, very sort of high level of the language. So we talk about passive languages. So for example, I do French, Romanian, obviously, Spanish and Dutch, and I have wildly differing levels of spoken language. So for example, my spoken Dutch isn't wonderful, but I understand that I have a very high level of comprehension. So I can take a book in Dutch, a non-fiction book, I can read it, I can watch all the TV shows in Dutch and understand them. Spoken, it's not great. So you need to have a passive knowledge of the language. My spoken Romanian is better, but I still don't work into Romanian. I only work into English. So again, you have to have a very high passive level. So you have to be very adaptable. You have to be able to work with what's thrown at you when somebody has a slightly difficult accent, for example. Somebody uses expressions you might not have heard, but you need to be able to work out what he's saying, get the message across. What's very important for us is getting the message across, not get hung up on the little words. So if there's a word you don't understand, you'll work it out from the context. But for that, you need quite a high level of understanding of the language. So I worked for a few years as a freelance interpreter, and then I was offered a temporary contract at the Commission. So that meant that I was on staff for a sort of limited period of time. And so I was a temporary agent for a while, and then I passed a competition. So again, these are the EU competitions. What's happening quite a bit now in the interpreting service, we have internal competitions. So those who are on temporary contracts qualify for an internal competition, but the process is more or less the same. So it just involves interpreting tests. So you do interpreting tests, you're given speeches, you have to interpret them into English. That's about it, really. I just said I'd give you a very brief overview of how you become an interpreter. I know I don't have a lot of time, so I didn't want to go on at great length, but obviously I'll be more than happy to answer any questions you might have. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand over to Aisling, and Aisling can talk a bit more about Irish, and she can talk about the day-to-day life of an interpreter, because again, I think that's one of the great aspects of the job. It is a really brilliant job. I've only given you the how you get in, but Aisling is very good at talking about, you know, the nice aspects of the job. So I'm going to hand over to her.
Thank you, Kevin, and hi everyone. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to speak with you today. My name's Aisling. I'm from Kildare originally, and I'm working as an interpreter in the English booth as well. My languages are French, German, and Irish into English, and then I also interpret into Irish. And I wanted to just talk to you a little bit today about, no more than Kevin, but talk to you a little bit about how I got into languages and interpreting, and then give you an idea of the job, the everyday kind of job, and why I like it basically as well. So I'm from Kildare. I actually grew up with languages at home. I grew up speaking Irish, German, and then obviously English as well. But I do want to stress that that is by no means a prerequisite to becoming an interpreter. It's not even necessarily an advantage, to be totally honest. I just mention it because it's my personal background. And for me, being surrounded by languages from a young age is what kind of sparked that interest in and love of languages. But that happens in so many different ways for people. You know, for some it can be holidays abroad, traveling, maybe working abroad, or education as well. So I always knew I wanted to study languages and work with languages. I went to NUI Galway and studied Irish and French initially, then spent a couple of years in France, and decided then that I wanted to do interpreting. Initially because I couldn't make a decision between my languages, and I felt it too hard to give up one in favor of the other. So I thought interpreting would allow me to use all of my languages on a daily basis. And that was why I chose it initially, to be honest. I went back to NUI Galway to do the Masters in Conference Interpreting there, because incidentally, that's the only interpreting course in the world where you can do Irish as part of your language combination. So that's why I studied there. Now, we don't have an awful lot of time, so I won't go into major detail on the interpreting course. But if anybody has any questions about that, because it's quite a different style, of course, it's very practical in nature. So if anybody has any questions on interpreting courses in general, maybe we can come back to them at a later stage. But basically, I graduated from the Masters in 2018, and then later that year, I got the opportunity to come to Brussels and to start working here with SCIC. So I've been here for about 2.5 years now, and that may seem like quite some time, but to be honest, I'm still finding my feet, slowly getting used to everything. You know, even today, there are meetings that I've never done before, and so you're discovering things for the first time, and it's a constant learning curve, which, to be honest, is something I really like about the job. Now, I don't want to kind of gush about interpreting and working as an interpreter. I don't want to paint too rosy a picture. It is challenging. It can be tough going, you know, full transparency, because there's so much going on in your brain. You're doing something unnatural in a way because, you know, growing up, you're taught to be quiet and listen when somebody else is speaking. And then having to do both at the same time, to speak while listening, it can seem a little bit unnatural. It can take some getting used to. But it's a hugely varied job as well. And that I suppose is one of the reasons I really like it. No 2 days are the same. I can honestly say that. You can be working in a totally different building with completely different colleagues, dealing with a totally different subject matter every day of the week. So again, you're constantly learning new things, both in terms of your languages, but just in general as well. It's a very rewarding job. You know, there are obviously hundreds of different meetings that take place on a weekly, yearly basis here in the institutions. And the small number of meetings that you're assigned to are just a drop in the ocean compared to all the work that goes on. But you do feel like you're playing your part, like you're contributing in some small way to all the work that happens as well. And then there are lots of different opportunities as well, not just in terms of, you know, learning new languages, but loads of different learning opportunities. Today, for example, I'm doing a seminar on EU social law, which is very interesting. There are opportunities to get involved with teaching and training new generations of interpreters. And usually in non-pandemic times, there are quite a few opportunities to travel as well, which is really, really nice. So I won't take up too much more time, but basically it's a challenging profession, it's challenging work, but hugely rewarding and fulfilling as a result. So if you have any questions, I think we'd all be more than happy to answer them at the end. Thanks a lot.
Thanks very much, Aisling, for that, and also to Kevin and Morag. We've been looking at interpretation, both in terms of the pathway and also the realities of kind of living the role, and that's been really helpful. And I see already on Slido some questions coming in. I suggest we group all of these, and when I come to Q&A at the end, I will put them to our panel at that stage. But now we want to move from interpretation to translation, and I'm delighted, as I say, that we have Oriane Flynn with us, and I'm now going to pass the floor to her to hear about that angle. So over to you, thanks.
Hi everyone, so delighted to be here with you today. I'm going to start off by making it blindingly obvious one of the first differences between translators and interpreters. You'll have noticed that the interpreters were speaking freely there, and us translators are very hung up on documents. That's what we spend our life with. So I'm going to share my screen and a little presentation that I've put together. And let's hope this works. Can you see my screen? Okay, good. So I've also, because as I said, all about the documents, put this together as a PDF file that you will be sent after the presentation, after this webinar, so you can refer back to all of the links and everything that are in there. And that's my email address there on the top, adrianneflynn@eceuropa.eu, and you're welcome to reach out with any questions or comments that come to you after this as well. And public servant, is my job to get back to you, and happy to help in any way that I can. So, okay, moving on then with the first slide, I hope. No, and I'm a little stuck, bear with me while I try and see what, it wouldn't be a webinar if things weren't going at least a little bit skew ways. Okay, right, so moving on. Yes, so the first thing I want to say is that if you want to come and work as a translator, there are certain requirements that are essential. Non-negotiable is that you have to be an EU citizen. So Brexit has meant that the pool of people we can potentially recruit from is a lot smaller now since the UK has left, but this is potentially lots more openings for Irish people and people with other EU passports. Now, unlike interpreting, you don't have to have a degree in translation to be a translator. You do have to have a degree. Now, it could be a degree in law, it could be in science, it could be in the natural sciences. I have colleagues who have previous lives as radiotherapists, working as natural scientists, all kinds of things, but it does have to be BA equivalent, like a Bachelor of Science or BA Engineering. You don't have to have professional experience as a translator. We will have you do translation tests as part of the process to come in, so that's how we check that you would be up to the job. But because recruitment normally starts at graduate level, you don't actually have to have any experience working as a translator. And unlike other EU jobs, you have to have 3 official EU languages to work as a translator. So one of those would be your mother tongue, and then you would have to have 2 other official EU languages. If your mother tongue is English, one of those other ones for the permanent positions would have to be French or German, because French, German, and English are the institution's main 3 working languages. and everyone has to have at least one of those, and if your English is your first one, you have to have one of the other ones as well. Okay, so I'm going to be talking a lot about something called EPSO. So if there's one thing you take away from today's talk, it's EPSO, and that is the European Personnel Selection Office, and they're sort of the gatekeeper for jobs at the EU institutions. And to get in, you have to do one of their specialist or generalist competitions, which are hard. Anyone who's attempted one or been through them will know this. If you don't prepare, you're unlikely to get in the top percentage, because there are many rounds involved and only the top percentage who pass each round go through to the next level. So it's a bit like one of those, like Europe's Next Top Translator, but without the telephone voting. But the good news is that not only does the DFA have resources available, like Eamonn mentioned earlier, and there are previous videos out there, you can also look up videos about EPSO and about the competitions on YouTube. And there's a wonderful site called eutraining.eu/resources. I'm not affiliated with them. They have some things that are paying, but there's also a lot of great free resources on there, like ebooks and glossaries, tips and tricks, and forums to talk about applying for EU jobs. So I would really, really strongly recommend that you look at those if you're interested in taking this to the next level. Now, what I will say is not all of the EU institutions do recruit through EPSO. The European Central Bank, for example, in Frankfurt, does have a separate process, and you can see their website and apply directly there if that's something you're interested in. And this is the website I mentioned. I won't dwell on it because we don't have a huge amount of time, but really urge you to check that out if you want to go further. So now a little bit about myself. Like Kevin, I don't come from any fancy background. I am one of 9 children, grew up in County Waterford, and what got me interested in languages is that my parents would speak a little Irish to each other when they had things that weren't suitable for small ears. So it was just really plain nosiness that got me into languages. I always liked to know what was going on. Like Kevin, most of my languages are passive. My competition languages, when I did my EPSO competition back in the day, which was 2002, I did French and German. So the most normal common language, nothing fancy. But then since I've been at the Commission, I've had the opportunity to do in-house training. So I've got to learn Spanish and Portuguese and Swedish and Finnish and Italian. So I now work from all of those, but they're all passive. My French and German will be active now because I've lived in those countries. But the rest of them are just passive. I can read the documents and work from them with my dictionaries and my databases, and I'm happy, but less great in an actual conversation with a real life person. And some of my other highlights from working at the Commission have been in 2008, when France had the rotating presidency of the Council. I had the opportunity to be seconded to Paris, and there I headed the web translation team there. So that was a nice, interesting way to meet people like Christine Lagarde, the then Minister for Finance, and Nicolas Sarkozy. And just, again, one of the opportunities I wouldn't have had otherwise, but through this job. And also, since I've been here, I've had the opportunity to be on the other side of the recruitment on the selection board for EPSO, and I've been part of that for different translator competitions for Irish and English and French and Croatian translators. So again, feel free to ask if you've got any questions about that. How did I get here? After school, I did a BA in French and German in UCC. I spent all my summers working abroad, and then I spent a year working as an English language assistant in the south of France. And then I came back and did a master's in translation studies, which isn't something you have to have for this job, but it was something that appealed to me very much. And so I just did that with the goal of getting into translation. Somehow I was lucky enough to be offered an internship at one of the lesser known EU agencies, the European Foundation for the Improvement of Living and Working Conditions, which is in Loughlinstown in County Dublin. So I did that right after my master's. And from there, I got a staff job at a big software company in Germany, SAP, which was a wonderful job, and I enjoyed it a lot. But at the same time, I wanted to work with more languages. So when a competition came along for the institutions, I jumped on it, because the other thing to know is that the competitions don't tend to run very, very often. So if one comes along, even if you don't think you're ready, go for it. If you're not in, you can't win, as they say. So why would anyone want to work for us? This has probably been covered in other webinars, but the benefits are very attractive. I mean, the starting salary is about 3,500 for contract agents who would be here for 3-year contracts, ranging then to almost 5,000 for regular officials or temporary agents who would have contracts for up to 6 or 7 years. And there's a lot of training and career opportunities. A lot of people move from one institution to the other. So we have a lot of crossover between the Commission and the Council and the Parliament and so on. And it's important to know that, again, you don't have to do a competition every time you move institutions. Once you're sort of in, then the whole institutions tend to be your oyster. So as I mentioned, we have several different types of contracts. There's the permanent contracts, which are the hardest ones to get, then temporary contracts. And also we have opportunities for trainees or stagiaires, but I believe there was a whole special webinar on that, so I won't dwell on that a lot. We don't work a lot with freelance translators. Most of what we send out, it goes out through a call for tender that we have every couple of years, and then we work directly with translation agencies, and it's only if they don't have capacity for whatever volumes we're sending that we would then approach freelancers directly. One point to note is that if someone was interested in applying for one of the 5-month traineeships, the deadline for the European Parliament's next intake in October is actually tomorrow. So if that's something you're interested in, get over on their website, which is I've linked to here, and take a look at that. Otherwise, the intake for the Commission one, for example, will be starting again soon for the March 2022. Now, about the competitions, circling back again to that, it's not just hard, it's also long. They generally take about 9 months from start to finish. So you'd want to be getting on with your life in the meantime. But just that, with all the different phases and rounds, it kind of does tend to go on. There's talk of this process being reformed at the moment. We have a new head of EPSO, and fingers crossed that this could be streamlined further. But when you're working with civil services, of course, there's lots of procedures to go through. So this might take a while. When those competitions are announced, they're published in the official journal of the European Union, but also in national press and on social media. So your best bet to keep up with what's happening is to follow one of our websites. I'll link to at the end so that you will find out what's happening. I won't dwell on these now because these different stages, just to lay them out to give you a rough idea, but this is something you'll get in your PDF that the DFA will send you after the show, just so it doesn't take you from surprise that there's all these different levels, and we can talk about them later. If you finally get onto the reserve list, then you will be contacted directly by one of the institutions and invited in for a more informal job interview at that stage, and you can choose to take the job if you're offered, or remain on the reserve list in the hope of something that suits you better. Technically, the reserve lists are only ever valid for 1 year, but in general practice, they are extended and extended until all those candidates have been recruited off. Now, here's the one of the more interesting bits. Right now, if you're interested in working as a translator, there is an ongoing competition, which is called a CAST competition. CAST is what we call a contract agent for specific tasks. So you could go on this EPSO website and register your interest. And then at some point either when the institutions have enough need, or when enough people have sort of registered to make it interesting to run some competition, to run some tests, then you will be contacted and asked to submit your documentation and to show up for some computer-based testing, verbal, abstract and numerical reasoning, and translation tests. And then this applies for all languages. So whether you have Irish as your main language or English as your main language, or whether if your main language is Lithuanian. I should point out that as Morag has said for the interpreters, also for the translators, we have a lot of colleagues who don't necessarily have Irish or UK passports, but who have grown up with English or studied with English, and who come in and work for us because they have that native level. So they're able to write at a high level, and they're able to pay attention to the small print, the details, and render those texts well. You will have to have, if you're applying to work as an English language translator, so translating into English, you will have to offer French or German as well. But there is no deadline for application, so that those opportunities are basically they're yours for the taking if you're interested. This might have been covered in the DFA's last briefing, but the Court of Justice is also regularly seeking to recruit lawyer linguists, not just for English language, also some other languages if you look on their website. There, the important thing to note is that you do need to have a legal qualification. That's non-negotiable for this competition. And the Court of Justice, which is based in Luxembourg, its working language is French. So for that one, you would have to have French and another EU language. Also, for people who have just 2 EU languages but might be interested in working with the institutions, there are ongoing opportunities for proofreaders, both for the Publications Office and the Court of Justice. And the 2 of those are based in Luxembourg. Slightly lower salary, but again, an interesting job, and worth looking into there, the description and the call for expressions of interest, if that's something that might appeal to you. And also, this is kind of a breaking development. We're currently looking in the English language department at the Commission for a seconded national expert to work in terminology. So this is if you're working in a university or a ministry and you're interested in coming over and having a taste of EU life, get in touch with me and I'll give you the details. It would be something where you would still be working for your current employer, they would still be paying your salary, but then the Commission would pay your allowances for coming over and working with Brussels, and it would be almost like an exchange. And if that's something you think might fit your profile, do email me directly and I'll give you all the details about that. So thanks for listening and thanks for your patience. And as I said, you'll get these links and hopefully there'll be something useful for you to work with there. Okay.
Thank you very much, Audrey. And that's a really comprehensive look at things and really helpful because it's an area we haven't covered in detail previously. So I think it's very valuable for our listeners and viewers to kind of have a sense of it, both in terms of the process, the entry requirements, and the realities of the job. So we're very grateful to you for that. I want to thank all of our speakers. There's already considerable interest. We've had, I think, a record number of people actually register for this webinar. So that's reflected in the fact that questions are coming at me very fast here on Slido. So I better get straight into them. I will redirect them where I think they should fall, but if others have views on it, please jump in as well around the panel as we go through these. A couple of things just at the beginning that I wanted to highlight myself. First of all, just that point that you made, Adriana, about the fact that not everything comes through EPSO, so it is important to keep an eye on the central bank and some of the other possibilities there. That's something people should be aware of, and good that you've drawn attention to it. One of our Slido comments suggests that this webinar should be broadcast in secondary schools, and of course that in a sense goes to the heart of one of the issues we do have in Ireland, which is that people don't begin to think about these careers almost until it's too late, and you need to be focusing very early. And we will look closely at possibilities of getting the kind of work we're doing on these webinars put into schools or available to schools in some way. So thanks for that suggestion. I think it is important. I'm also asked here about materials in Irish, that there seems to be relatively little on EPSO. And there I'm delighted to say we have taken an initiative here at the Permanent Representation in conjunction very much with our colleagues at the relevant government department at home, who have commissioned a translation of some of the multiple choice question material that is required for concours, and that will be coming on stream very soon in Irish. And that is a recurrent theme that is raised with us, and I'm glad we've been, with our colleagues, able to do something about it. And you should have the fruits of that, certainly, I think, before the summer is out. Let me turn then maybe to some specific questions. Somebody is asking about the translation job in itself. I suppose it's a very broad question. How interesting is the job? I have images of being stuck at a computer all day long. Is it different from that? And what is the, I suppose, to build on that? I mean, what is the most challenging aspect of the work, would you say, and what is the most rewarding?
Okay. Okay, you are definitely at a computer all day long. Like there's no getting around that. You do have to be IT literate to be a translator, because there's a lot of research involved. We're working with translation memory software. I mean, they're fairly easy to use. If you're following this webinar, you pick that up. That's not particularly complicated. But yes, if you're obviously you're typing one document in from another, but it's not just that you're typing something out. There's a whole cognitive process going on in the meantime. There's a lot of research involved. I find it very interesting. I don't know what that says about me, but we do all kinds of documents, and normally, like, my areas would be agriculture, they would be energy, they would be nuclear. There's all kinds of things, but for some of the languages that we don't have enough staff in each unit to specialize. So then they're pooled across the units. So I could be doing finance, I could be doing tax. those things don't thrill me, but like until somebody is going to pay me to lie on a beach and drink margaritas, I think this is a really good job. So like, as I said before, I worked in a software company and I was always translating software and it was always German into English. And here I've come on, I've added so many languages and I could add more. I have colleagues who've added like so many, it makes my head spin, almost all of the EU languages and then some other like Arabic and Japanese for fun. It's not necessarily everyone's idea of a good time, but you don't have to learn loads of new languages. You are encouraged to learn some. This happens more if you're working in the English, translating into English, because we translate all of the incoming documents from the member states. If you were, for example, translating in the Polish or the Lithuanian department, you're going to be translating always, pretty much always, 99% of the time, from English into your mother tongue. And it's going to be all of the legislation that the Commission produces or the press releases and so on. But again, there's always different topics. The topics are changing, whether it's COVID or the recovery and resilience facility, or whether you are also working on the train networks or education in schools. I mean, my granny used to say, if you're bored, it's because you're boring. I think she had a bit of a point, but you know, it's a great job and there are great benefits. And like the nice thing is, you know, when you finish, you've still got enough, if this isn't too crass, money in the bank to go on a nice holiday, you know, reopen Europe providing. So I think swings and roundabouts, I value that I work for an institution. I don't have to chase up people with invoices the way I would have to do if I were a freelancer. So yeah, but definitely you're in front of a computer and you want to be doing your stretches and, you know, doing your ergonomics so you don't get repetitive strain injury. That's a thing.
Thanks. Kestel an seo an bhfuil sé níos fearr teanga sais anmh a bheith go chun postáil in Europe. And is it better to have an unusual, I suppose they mean a slightly maybe lesser spoken language or whatever? Is it better to have that kind of a language? Does that give you an advantage? I suppose the questioner may be thinking of Kevin's experience with Romanian or whatever. Would any of you care to comment on that? Just jump in.
Shall I? Sorry, Morag, unless you want to go ahead.
Well, I was going to say something, if you like, because I didn't actually talk about my own personal experience, which was coming back to the point about reaching out to secondary schools. I started out just with French at school. That's what I did. I came from a purely English-speaking background, grew up in Edinburgh, and went to school there. And I realised when I got to my exams, which in Scotland are at 16 year hires, I only had French. And at that point, I thought, actually, do you know what? I'd quite like to maybe consider languages. And I was lucky enough to be able to take Italian as a second language just for my last year in secondary school before I went on to university and did French and Italian. So you don't have to have exotic languages in your combination. And in fact, a lot of university degrees now have ab initio. So I know you could start with one language that you've got from school and pick up a second language when you get to university. What interests us as interpreters is that you have very solid languages. So it's not about which languages, it's about having two languages to a very high level. We can't add the string of languages that the translators do because you have to have that very, very comprehensive understanding of all of the facets of the language and all the tiny little details, which you can't look up whilst you're interpreting. A translator can look things up if they don't know technical terms and they don't know a certain expression, then they've got time to look that up in a dictionary. We don't have that luxury. So that was just to say that. And in fact, on the secondary schools, there is a very good initiative that's being run in Ireland that we've taken part in the last 2 years, the Think Languages event, which is organised by Languages Connect through the Post-Primary Languages Initiative. And there will be another edition coming out in November, and we'll be producing a workshop for that, where hopefully secondary kids who are doing either French, German, Spanish or Italian will have the opportunity to see a little bit what's involved with interpreting.
If I could add something there about the exotic languages, what I will say is two things. On the one hand, we would love to have you if you have exotic languages. It's harder to find people translating into English from Polish and Lithuanian than people who have French and German or Spanish and Italian or whatever. But the other point that is very important is if you're doing a competition, it's really vital to do it in your 2 strongest languages, because you've got to pass really high up to get taken off the list. So the most important thing is, if for example, you've got Spanish, Italian, and Romanian, do them in the 2 languages that are strongest, and then let us know also on your application that you've got the other exotic languages, because that's going to help you stand out. But don't learn a new language and then, if it's not at the right level, attempt to do the competition in it and maybe not get through, because then we don't get you at all, which is we miss out, you miss out, everybody loses. We want a win-win situation where you do it in your strongest languages and then either come in and add on an exotic language, or if you've been doing one on the side through adult education classes or online or whatever, excellent, that would really make you stand out, and we'd be delighted to have that.
Thanks. Anyone else? Kevin, on this?
So I'll just very, very briefly, I think just coming back to Morag's point, yeah, so I think the strength of the language is very important. I only did French at school. I did Spanish starting at university. Then I went to Romania and I learned it there. But it was a strong language for me at the time. And I'd forgotten a lot of my Spanish. So when I came in, and again, it kind of links into what Audrey said, when I came in, I started with French and Romanian because they were the 2 strong languages. But again, it's slightly different with translators, but with interpreters, if you come in with French and Spanish, if it's French and Italian, if it's German and Spanish, we want somebody who can do the job well, has a good level of the language and has the skills needed to interpret. And then later on, since I've started, I started with French and Romanian. I've added on Dutch and Spanish afterwards, and I'm working on German for my sins. So you will add them over your career, but to start off, it's 2 languages, one of which being French and German at a high level, and that you can really understand very deeply.
Thanks, Kevin. Somebody has just flagged, don't forget the legal revisers in the institutions, and of course we haven't. There's a very good webinar that took place not that long ago, available on our YouTube account on that very specific area. Ceistelle anseo, cén sort deis a taistil a bhaineann le post san Aontas Eorpach atá déile le aisteachán agus ateangracht. So bhfuil deis a taistil. Aisling agus Kevin agus Adrian, maybe you could speak to that. It's to do with travel opportunities. Aisling.
Ja, cínta freagra mé as gaige agus sin féin de Audrey áirt fi chuirsaí aisteáin. Bhaid tá annach chuid deisina taistil an fáir inis le líon na panzéime tháinig leidúis na deisinaí sin ach tuach ná bíon go leor deisinaí an. Bíon na cathaircha sin an a dosach báide atá ag críóir na institútaí so an Bhrisel ar nó i Luxembourg agus Strasbourg freisin. Agus féidir go a taistil taobh mágus na cathaircha sin chumá. So mar hampla bíon áisíochtaí agus agriochtaí éagsúla go chuid in i loníthe chuile Wallstát, so dé tá taistil íon éis meach sin. nó ar nó i bíon uachtaránacht na cóirle an freisin, agus aithríonn an uachtaránacht sin chuile sé bhí. Agus duch ná taíonn sé leis a dír, cruinnethe éagsúla a reachtáid sa tír hain, leis a tír a thospáint, agus leis an tardáin sin na úsáid. So bíon go leor deisinaí an agus fáiríar mar dúirt mé tháinig leidúir sin na lína pandéim ach tásúla an inis go mé na deisinaí sin an a rís go luath amach anseo.
Thanks. Maybe Adrian on that question of opportunities.
Okay, so for translation, it's a little different because mostly we are at our computers. We could do them from anywhere. And so we're usually doing them from our base here in Brussels or Luxembourg. The main time we would go and travel, apart from if we're doing being on secondment for one of the rotating presidencies, as Aisling said there, in which I got to do back in 2008 in Paris. And I have a colleague doing it in Lisbon now at the moment for the Portuguese presidency. Generally, the most of the time we get to travel with work is when we're doing language courses. And then we would go to that member state for a couple of weeks during the year, maybe 2 or 3 weeks at a time. You can do that for up to 2 or 3 times per language, and you have a sort of subsidized, you're doing it on working time, so you don't have to take your holiday for it, and you're getting, so that's a little subsidy, and then you would pay for the course then, or at least some of it yourself, depending on the different language and how much it's in the interest of the service. But that's always nice. But yeah, we're not, the interpreters have the more jet-setting lifestyle for sure.
I see another question here, which is kind of perhaps related, which is there any possibility to work as a translator for the EU without moving to Luxembourg? And of course,
well,
you just
okay,
mentioned
so
Brussels, but
maybe they also mean Brussels, because we're sort of 2/3 of us are in. Is it even 2/3? There's a split. We're mostly between Brussels and Luxembourg now. There is a new pilot project for Irish language translators that some of them will be based out of Grange, working there. I think it's the Food and Veterinary Office. They will be attached there. But this is a pilot project. Some people have got their sort of placements there and will be starting there quite soon, but it's too early to say at this stage if that will be expanded or used for other languages as well. And what else did I want to say about that? The only other opportunity really is where we have field officers, where we have 1 or 2 people in each national capital working as translators there and doing a lot more localization and local events. But on the whole, we're mostly based between Brussels and Luxembourg, and occasionally there's people in Paris or in Frankfurt for agencies there.
Question
Can
here.
I just add something there, Eamonn, if possible? Because in fact, one of the great advantages of working as a freelance interpreter is you can theoretically be based wherever you want to be. So we recruit interpreters from all around the world. Obviously, for the everyday work, it is an advantage to be based in Brussels, but we do have a lot of colleagues who work back and forth, Irish, English, for example, who are based in Ireland and who are brought across for the Parliament to the Strasbourg plenaries, or we bring them into Brussels or wherever the work may be. So that is one of the big advantages of being a freelance interpreter. If you're on the staff, you would have to be based in Brussels.
If I could just add that living in Brussels is no major hardship. It's good food, good beer, it's a nice place to live. I'm definitely a fan.
Okay, I think that's what you call a fully comprehensive answer to that question. There are 1 or 2 more questions that we'll be able to take now. There's quite a few on the list generally, and we'll try and reply to those. We'll find an effective way to get some information out on anything that we don't cover today. One question that I've just been asked, which I think is an interesting one, which is: will éon cuasa teangareachta líne tíbha mud a COVID cévé de áin teangara? So it's 2 different questions there. Bader, Aisling, or Kevin might want to have a look at those. They're essentially looking at sort of, is there an online possibility to study interpretation now? That's the question, and also then sort of the earning capacity of interpreters.
I don't know, Aisling, do you want me to start or yeah, at the moment, because of the pandemic, obviously everything is online generally, and interpreting courses. So we occasionally provide assistance to interpreting courses across Europe. Aisling has been to Galway recently. I help out with some of the Romanian courses, and so it's all online. And it's not ideal, obviously, because it's a very interactive job being an interpreter, and it's not something you can really do online, even though there are attempts and there's experiments going on, etc. To do an interpreting course, you'd have to be present. And the thing with doing an interpreting course, it's quite intense. It is an intense thing. You have to really throw yourself in. It's not something you can do. Maybe there are some courses that are part-time, but you really have to throw yourself in and dedicate yourself to it. It's learning a skill. You are learning a skill. And it's not something you can really do by half measures, So I always compare interpreting to carpentry, So you learn a process, a sort of skill, and yeah, you have to be fully committed to that. And the course in Galway, I think, is 1 year. There's other courses and that's quite intense. It's a lot crammed into 1 year. There are other courses around Europe that are a bit longer. There are 2 years, but I don't think that makes them that much less intense. So online is not really a solution at the moment. There's nothing online, and you really don't want, in my humble opinion anyway, you really don't want to be doing an interpreting course online. It's something that had to be done out of necessity, but it's not really something that I think we would encourage. I don't know, maybe more I could add to that, but maybe Aisling would like to talk as well about the course in Galway.
Aisling?
Yeah, I just want to reiterate what Kevin was saying there. I mean, even if there was a course online, which I'm not sure if there is, I don't think I would recommend it, to be totally honest, personally, because it is something you need to be there. You're not just learning the skill, but you're using the equipment, and you really need to be there, be present to get a feel for everything. So I don't think I would recommend an online interpreting course. I think the other part of the question was, in terms of salaries and pay, I think the question was in Irish. So that depends, again, if you're working as a freelancer or if you're working as a staff interpreter. For staff interpreters, it depends on a scale, and that information is available in quite a transparent way online, I think. And then for freelancers, can make between 330 and 420 or so euro per day, depending on the experience that they have, is my understanding. Having never worked as a freelancer, maybe Morag can correct me if I'm wrong there.
Those figures sound fairly accurate to me. Yes, you earn around 400 euros a day, and that's taxed at source. So you're not paying your national income tax on top of that. So that's about 400 euros net, slightly less for an absolute beginner.
And
yes, the actual yes, the pay is similar to the figures that Audrey Ann gave for the translators. But we don't work with contract agents. We work with temporary officials. So that's a slightly different scale. But you would be having a starting salary, I think, there of around 4,500–5,000 euros net.
Okay. As I say, I think we've covered a lot of ground, and we unfortunately have to draw proceedings to a close, but I really wanted to thank our speakers in particular on your behalf. I think they have answered very many questions. Anything that they've missed, we will try and get out to you, or anything rather that we've missed, we will try and get out to you as soon as possible. We'll have a good review of the Slido questions and just check that nothing has been left unanswered. And a sincere thanks to Morag for outlining those paths into interpretation and current opportunities. And of course, a huge thanks to Aisling, Kevin and Oriane for taking the time to share your experience with us. I know that I found it very interesting, and I hope that those watching have done so too. I also hope that this webinar has offered encouragement to all of you who've joined us online. And I want to thank you for taking an interest in this event. Again, to stress at the close, the Department of Foreign Affairs is willing and able to assist people who apply for EU jobs. That support is available from us, so do get in touch at eujobs@dfa.ie if you are applying for EU jobs. And today, while we've focused on the specific roles of interpreters and translators, there are many opportunities to use your language skills in the EU institutions and agencies through specific language roles and in policy areas. If you want to rewatch some of this webinar or share it with someone you know, it will be available shortly on our YouTube account. You can also follow us on Twitter at EU Jobs Ireland to keep up to date with all of our upcoming events and various traineeships and job opportunities. So with that, let me again thank our speakers and you for watching today. Gur míle maith agus slán go fóill.